Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Thank you for joining us. I am Greg Poling, Senior Fellow for Southeast Asia and Director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative here at CSIS. And this is our annual Asian Architecture Conference, which, like all of our conferences this year, has had to go virtual, and we've split it up into 2 days. So this morning, we are going to be discussing U.S. And allied and partner interests at the ASEAN and East Asia Summit, which will kick off this week and go through the weekend. And then in 2 days, on the afternoon of Thursday here in Washington, my colleagues in the Scholl Chair for International Business will host our second panel on APEC, which will be kicking off on the 20th of this month. So a bit of housekeeping up top. Everything that's said today is going to be on the record. Since this is being done as a Zoom webinar, we won't be able to throw to audience members for Q&A, but we ask that if you have questions, either for our keynoter or for our panelists at the 9 o'clock hour, you go ahead and type it into the Q&A function and we will collect those and read them. The event today is being made possible by general support to CSIS. And with that, let me introduce our speakers and then step out of the way. So our keynote today is going to be provided by Ambassador Atul Keshap, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Ambassador Keshap has served in many postings in his career, including in India and Morocco and Guinea. He was the ambassador to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. And he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia and U.S. Senior Official for APEC. So very well versed in all of the topics we're going to be discussing today. After Ambassador Keshap's remarks, he's going to be joined by David Feith for Q&A. David Feith is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in EAP with responsibility for multilateral affairs, meaning he runs the shop on Indo-Pacific strategy, ASEAN, South China Sea. He was, before government service, an editorial writer for the Wall Street Journal. And so with that, let me step back and turn over the mic to Ambassador Keshap. Atul, the floor is yours.
Greg, thank you very much. I really appreciate your kind introduction. Thank you as well to AMTI and CSIS for organizing all of this, and very warm greetings to everybody around the Indo-Pacific who is tuning in for this conference. I wish you all a very excellent couple of days. I'm honored to be with you today to discuss U.S. priorities for this year's East Asia Summit. I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, David Feith. David, as many of you know, leads our multilateral engagement in the Indo-Pacific, and he has been a tremendous partner in helping us to realize the goals of our Indo-Pacific strategy. After my brief remarks, David and I very much look forward to your questions. Let me start my remarks by talking a little bit about America's vision for the Indo-Pacific. In just a few days, leaders from around the region will gather virtually for the East Asia Summit, or EAS. The 18 members of the EAS include the 10 ASEAN member states and their 8 dialogue partners, including many partners and allies of the United States of America. The last major EAS event was in September at the Ministerial, when Secretary Pompeo joined his counterparts for a useful discussion on the region's political and security challenges. I know that the Secretary was heartened to hear the widespread support for transparency, the rule of law, and respect for sovereignty, and to hear shared concerns over recent threats to these values. Let me pause and take a moment to mention a few of our major engagements over the past few months, despite the pandemic. In June, Secretary Pompeo met with Yang Jiechi in Honolulu. Our dialogue with the People's Republic of China is ongoing, even as we work through our differences. In July, Secretary Pompeo and former Secretary Esper met with their Australian counterparts face-to-face in Washington, D.C., demonstrating the enduring bonds between our two countries. Last month, the Secretary of State participated in the Quad meetings in Tokyo. This forum represents multilateral diplomacy at its best, effective and efficient, and working with allies and partners for the security of the Indo-Pacific. The Secretary also very recently participated in important 2+2 meetings in New Delhi, and he also wrapped up a very productive series of visits with our partners in Jakarta, Hanoi, Colombo, and in Male in the Maldives. This week, the Secretary welcomed to Washington Republic of Korea Foreign Minister Kang for important discussions between allies. Earlier this year, HHS Secretary Azar and Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environmental Affairs Keith Kroc made historic visits to Taiwan. And importantly, Deputy Secretary of State Began has had regular calls with key Indo-Pacific counterparts on our fight against COVID and planning for the region's economic recovery. So as we carry on our bilateral efforts to ensure the security and economic prosperity of the region, we recognize the importance of fora like the EAS, with ASEAN at its center. At this year's EAS, we will again describe our bold vision for the Indo-Pacific that the President outlined in Vietnam in 2017. We will focus on what we have achieved so far and what we want to achieve going forward. Our Indo-Pacific vision aligns with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and with the priorities of our allies and partners. It is based on principles that underpin peace and security, including transparency, fair and reciprocal trade, adherence to international law, energy security, and a commitment to ASEAN centrality. This vision is necessarily a long-term one, but the United States is always prepared to respond to the region's immediate needs. This year and in coming years, those immediate needs center on responding to and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. At the EAS, we will discuss how the United States is leading in public health and humanitarian assistance. We have invested more than 20 billion taxpayer dollars in the international fight against COVID-19, and we will ensure that a safe and effective vaccine is available as quickly as possible. We will describe further collaboration between the United States and ASEAN countries in preventing infections, adding to our extensive public health programs and projects in the region. The U.S.-ASEAN Health Futures Initiative, for example, will expand public health cooperation in Southeast Asia, building on over $3.5 billion in U.S. public assistance to ASEAN countries over the last 20 years. Our public health work includes USAID's support to the ASEAN Public Health Emergency Coordinating System, a network that enhances coordination, data transparency, and legal measures so that ASEAN countries can respond as a region to emerging public health crises and help prevent the next pandemic. We will also note our appreciation for the efforts of our Indo-Pacific partners in supporting ASEAN's COVID-19 response. Friends, let me talk a little bit about American support for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Whether in public health, human capital development, investment, or innovation, the United States is making good on its commitment to the ASEAN region and the greater Indo-Pacific. We will make this clear at the EAS. Since 2005, we have provided over $813 million to support basic and higher education and more than $785 million to support exchange programs. We have welcomed over 500,000 ASEAN students in U.S. universities since 2010. Just this year, we inaugurated the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative Academy at Fulbright University in Ho Chi Minh City. The Academy offers executive-level seminars for entry to mid-level professionals from across Southeast Asia around the themes of technology and innovation, public policy, and entrepreneurship. The United States is committed to expanding private sector participation as an alternative to state-dominated financing that impinges on national sovereignty and saddles economies with debilitating debt. We are strengthening energy markets and infrastructure through Asia Edge and helping the region attract U.S. finance and investment. For example, despite the pandemic, we joined with Vietnam to hold the third Indo-Pacific Business Forum last month, which brought together business and government leaders to spur economic innovation and collaboration. Firms from the United States of America signed over $11 billion in commercial deals, and the United States, with our partners Australia and Japan, announced a $30 million investment in an undersea fiber optic cable in Palau. Over 4,200 American companies operate in the ASEAN region, including 70% of American companies in the Fortune 500. They employ local workers, they train their staff and improve their leadership and technical skills, contributing to the region's human capital development. In addition to our private sector, the U.S. government is using a range of tools to support private sector-led growth. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation already has over $1 billion invested in the countries of Southeast Asia and is eager to catalyze billions more. There are other government agencies also working to grow our trade and investment, including the United States Trade and Development Agency, the Commerce Department, and the United States Ex-Im Bank. In the last year alone, these and other agencies supported dozens of projects with a market value of over $125 billion and potential United States export content of $22 billion. Another exciting aspect of our economic work is the U.S.-ASEAN Smart Cities Partnership, which is announcing pairings on transportation between Las Vegas and Phuket, Dallas and Kuala Lumpur, Portland and Johor Bahru, Boston and Phnom Penh, and Los Angeles and Jakarta. We are also working to announce 3 new city pairings on water management and are starting a digitalization project with 3 ASEAN smart city power grids. We hope that this will very much help them to become more efficient, resilient, and able to incorporate new sustainable energy sources. The United States is also working with our partners to build out the Blue Dot Network and Clean Network initiatives. These initiatives promise to expand transparency and sustainability in key infrastructure, including the next generation of 5G telecom networks. We think that these exciting programs and partnerships are solid proof of the sustained American commitment to ASEAN. I do have to talk, however, about the destabilizing actions and activities of another key country in the region. China, unfortunately, has chosen a different path from a free and open Indo-Pacific. They have exploited the COVID-19 crisis with destabilizing actions. I expect we will hear, as we did at the EAS Foreign Ministers meeting in September, region-wide concern over Beijing's assault on the autonomy of its neighbors and on the rules-based system that has underpinned global prosperity and peace for decades. The United States will be equally candid in our remarks at the EAS. In the South China Sea, Beijing's unlawful maritime claims and its intimidation of ASEAN coastal states are unacceptable. In 2015, General Secretary Xi Jinping stood in the White House Rose Garden and stated, China does not intend to pursue militarization of the Spratly Islands, and China's outposts would not target or impact any country. Beijing instead pursued a reckless and provocative militarization of those disputed outposts. They have deployed anti-ship cruise missiles, expanded military radar and signals intelligence capabilities, constructed dozens of fighter jet hangars, and have built runways capable of accommodating combat aircraft. The PRC uses these militarized outposts as platforms of coercion to assert control over waters to which Beijing has no lawful maritime claim. They serve as staging grounds for the hundreds of maritime militia vessels and China Coast Guard ships that regularly harass civilian craft and impede legitimate law enforcement activities, offshore fishing, and hydrocarbon development by neighboring states. Since 2013, the People's Republic of China has undertaken massive dredging to build up more than 3,000 acres across the South China Sea, causing untold destruction to coral reefs and to fisheries, all in an attempt to further Beijing's unlawful maritime claims. Beijing has sought to scare away the competition for oil and gas resources, then push other states in the South China Sea to accept what it calls joint development deals with its own state-owned firms, essentially saying to them, if you want to develop these resources off your coast, your only option is to do so with us. Colleagues and friends, this is extortion, plain and simple. In June, ASEAN leaders stressed that maritime disputes like these and a code of conduct in the South China Sea must rely on international law, including UNCLOS, and we support that. This year, we strengthened our approach to the South China Sea, rejecting China's unlawful claims and imposing costs on executives and state-owned firms that further those claims. Since then, an unprecedented number of countries, including 6 of the 18 EAS members, have rejected China's South China Sea claims at the United Nations. Moving a little bit broader in the region, let me talk a little bit about Cambodia. On the mainland of Asia, we have seen reports that a maritime security facility was demolished at Ream Naval Base in Cambodia. We are concerned that the raising of this facility, and I heard reports about another facility as well, may be tied to plans for hosting PRC military assets and personnel at Ream. A permanent PRC military presence in Cambodia would be disruptive and destabilizing to the Indo-Pacific region and could undermine the freedom of navigation and overflight. In a November 2019 letter, the president opened the door to discussing ways to increase U.S.-Cambodia cooperation that protects the autonomy of Cambodia and reflects the will of the Cambodian people. We hope that Prime Minister Hun Sen will take us up on our offer for dialogue. We would welcome a dialogue about Cambodia's needs and to identify how we can support infrastructure at Ream that would benefit an independent Cambodia and all nations supportive of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The disturbing reports out of Ream are part of a broader troubling trend in the Mekong region. The region faces several challenges, including historic droughts exacerbated by Beijing's chokehold of Mekong River flows and its ties to infrastructure-linked debt and a significant increase in transnational crime and trafficking in persons, drugs, arms, and wildlife. Beijing is increasingly applying its South China Sea playbook, coercion, disinformation, and contempt for rules throughout the Mekong region. But we have a playbook as well, supporting the prosperity, autonomy, and security of our friends and allies. That is why we were thrilled to join with our Mekong partners to launch the Mekong United States Partnership in September. The partnership follows the hugely successful Lower Mekong Initiative and will support a deeper, more strategic relationship with the 5 countries of the Mekong. The partnership will continue our long-term work on water governance, which is not simply a technical issue for the peoples of the Mekong, but an existential one with over 60 million people depending on the river for their livelihoods. I mentioned Beijing's unilateral manipulation of upstream water flows through its network of 11 mega dams. I've been told that these dams hold enough water to fill the entire Chesapeake Bay, or to provide enough water to all 8.3 million residents of New York City for 35 years. Until recently, China has refused to share year-round data on its dam operations. Its unilateral withholding of water has exacerbated historic droughts and contributed to devastating impacts on tens of millions of people. In response to requests from the Mekong countries, Beijing recently announced its intention to share year-round water data with the Mekong River Commission. This is a start, but regional experts point out that the limited scope of the data Beijing is providing, which falls short of the comprehensive and year-round hydrological data necessary for downstream planning and water resources management. There is also the challenge for Mekong stakeholders to independently verify the PRC's data. The PRC's unilateral manipulation of upstream dams is just one of a number of the troubling trends I mentioned. We hear from communities in the Mekong that they are concerned about infrastructure-linked debt and the predatory business practices of Beijing's state-owned actors. We hear concerns about the People's Republic of China's controlled economic zones and casinos, which function as clusters of transnational criminality with ties to trafficking of persons, drugs, and wildlife, and money laundering networks. Beijing's failure to curb corruption tied to these PRC-controlled projects threatens to further strengthen criminal networks that undermine the security and autonomy and sovereignty of not only the Mekong countries, but even other ASEAN members. We will raise these concerns at the EAS, and we will continue to encourage ASEAN to elevate the Mekong region as central to their prosperity and collective interests, as they have done with the South China Sea. And permit me to add in this regard that Vietnam, we feel, has done a terrific job as ASEAN chair, and we wish them best of success and good luck with the EAS summit. I should touch on Hong Kong, Tibet, and Xinjiang. We will also raise our concerns about Beijing's actions in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, and elsewhere in China. Beijing has broken its promises to the people of Hong Kong. Any erosion of confidence in the rule of law or protection of rights has significant international impacts. We will continue to call out Beijing's repression of Uyghurs and members of other Muslim and ethnic minority groups in Xinjiang. The global community is calling on the PRC to end its inhuman campaign of repression in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and elsewhere in China. Friends, the election in Burma just took place on November the 8th. So as the Secretary of State said yesterday, the United States recognizes that Burma's parliamentary elections, the second competitive national election since the end of military rule, marks an important step in the country's democratic transition. While we are concerned by problems in the electoral process, including unelected seats reserved for the military, disenfranchisement, and the canceling of votes in several regions, we remain a dedicated partner of the people of Burma in their pursuit of democracy, peace, and national reconciliation. A key component of these efforts is addressing the Rakhine State crisis. We continue to call on the government of Burma to fully implement its commitments with UN agencies, to allow unhindered humanitarian access to regions affected by violence, and to establish conditions conducive to the safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable return of refugees and internally displaced persons. The United States is the leading single donor of humanitarian assistance to the Rakhine State crisis, providing nearly $1.2 billion since the escalation of violence in 2017. On October 22, we co-hosted a conference to promote sustainable support for the Rohingya refugee response that generated nearly $600 million in new commitments. I want to pause here and mention, by comparison, that China's contribution to the Joint Response Plan in 2020 was only $400,000, and nothing, as far as we can tell, in 2019 or in 2018, which is a paltry sum for a UN P5 member, especially given China's role in drug and weapons smuggling that erode peace and stability in Myanmar and the region. Finally, friends, let me touch on the DPRK. We will explain that we remain open to diplomatic negotiations with North Korea to eliminate the threat to international peace and security posed by air and ballistic missile programs. Our goal is to achieve complete denuclearization of the DPRK, as committed to by Chairman Kim when they met in Singapore. We will call on EAS members' cooperation to fully implement obligations under UN Security Council resolutions, sending a strong, unified message that North Korea must halt provocations, abide by its obligations under UN Security Council resolutions, and engage in sustained and substantive negotiations with the United States. Friends, I want to thank you very much. Greg, thank you for the invitation to speak. I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the topics that are on the minds of my colleagues and friends across the United States government as we head into the East Asian Summit. I want to emphasize how important the Indo-Pacific is and how critical it is to our national security and to the achieving the goals of our national security strategy. I'm very honored to have had this opportunity, and I would be very pleased, along with my colleague, Deputy Assistant Secretary David Feith, to take your questions. Thank you.
Atul, thank you very much for that great overview. Just to confirm, you have a hard stop at 9 o'clock, right?
I could go a few minutes, Greg.
Okay, let's try to round up as many as we can. I'll remind folks watching, go ahead and type in any questions you have into the Q&A function, and please identify yourselves when you do so, so that Atul and David know who they're answering. So the first question comes from Sungmin Lee with Radio Free Asia. You already answered one of his questions, whether or not DPRK will be on the agenda. His other question was just if you could confirm who's going to represent the United States at EAS, and I'd also throw in just to confirm for APEC on the 20th.
Thank you very much. Look, these are decisions that are being worked by our NSC friends, so I'll defer to them.
Okay, fair enough. We have another question from Mark Mannion. Mark's with CRS, who asked if we could get any more details about the Blue Dot Network. How many projects have been certified? What are the standards? Do we expect any other countries to join in the coming months, et cetera?
Great question for David.
Thanks for that, Greg. The Blue Dot Network work is of course part of a a lot of very substantial efforts that we've been doing across the U.S. government and with allies and partners on infrastructure issues and infrastructure investment issues. And so with Blue Dot, for example, we saw the Secretary's announcement 2 weeks ago at the Indo-Pacific Business Forum of the Palau Spur undersea cable project. This is a project that we've worked with Japan and Australia. It connects to a broader trans-Pacific undersea cable from the US West Coast to Singapore that is also supported by our new Development Finance Corporation, the DFC. And this reflects the sort of cooperation that we are advancing through the Blue Dot network. We've had discussions about this across our engagements. When the president was in India in February, he spoke about the Blue Dot network. We've discussed it in the ASEAN contexts, in the Quad context, in Europe at the 3Cs summit that took place recently, and in Central Asia. These are conversations, obviously, that are broad because they reflect very broad interests that the countries have in infrastructure that is high quality, that is sustainable in fiscal terms and environmental terms and labor terms. And there's been a very substantial flowering of these efforts across our system and with allies, to include Japan, Australia, and others. And so there will be more of this to come, more projects, obviously, and I think much more discussion of the sort of standards issues that we've seen in the G7 context and in the G20 context, where the Japanese and others have done extremely good work on advancing standards for high quality infrastructure. And there'll be more of that through the Blue Dot and through other related efforts going forward.
Thank you, David. We've got a couple of kind of broad questions. Let me lob this one up and answer it however you'd like. Ekaterina Kaldanova asked, what is the East Asia Summit's place in the Indo-Pacific vision? I suppose we could broaden that and just say kind of what is ASEAN's place in the Indo-Pacific vision as you see it?
Well, let me reiterate that we view ASEAN centrality as extremely important. We invest enormously in our diplomatic engagements with ASEAN as a whole, and also bilaterally with the 10 member states of ASEAN. And the EAS, of course, is how ASEAN interacts with the broader network of partners and allies in the region. The United States has been very dedicated to ASEAN and EAS diplomacy for many years, and we will continue to be. The whole purpose of giving this rather detailed presentation was to show that we have always been a very, very engaged partner. If you look back to the earliest days of our republic, we had Yankee clippers trading in the waters of Southeast Asia 2 centuries ago. The very first American corporate presence in Southeast Asia was, I believe, Standard Oil of New York in 1895. We've been, in the modern life of Southeast Asia, we have been helping build robust, prosperous societies. Our companies, our businesses, of course, our government efforts, civil society, NGOs. We are all about seeing the entire region prosper and thrive and have the ability to continue to be sovereign and to make good, sound choices for the well-being of all of their people. And part of that is the effort within ASEAN and EAS.
Thanks. We have another broad question from Kogila Balakrishnan, who asked how the U.S. government plans to invest in ASEAN skills, education, innovation. It's kind of the other bucket, right? The not security, not econ. You talked a bit about Waisili. You talked about the Mekong investments. Anything big and flashy and new we might expect this weekend, or anything you'd like to build on a little bit more in that vein?
Let me turn it over to David.
Yeah, thanks for that. The work on all the issues that you've just asked about, Greg, on human capital development broadly, has been a longstanding focus of our work with ASEAN and with ASEAN countries, and has been a particular emphasis this year. This was actually something that was a particular focus of the planning work that we were working on about a year ago in the run-up to the leaders meeting that we had looked forward to hosting in Las Vegas with our president and the ASEAN leaders in March, which unfortunately, of course, had to be taken down as an early COVID casualty. But this human capital development work has been very much a focus and has been seen. Ambassador Keshap mentioned the launch just 2 months ago of our YSEALI Academy, the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative Academy at the Fulbright University in Ho Chi Minh City. Of course, the Fulbright University itself is a reflection of the longstanding U.S. investment as a government and in partnership with private sector partners like Harvard University in that case and others in educational institutions in Southeast Asia, in educational exchange with Southeast Asia. And one thing that we are focused on that there will be discussion about this weekend in the EAS and US ASEAN summit context will be educational exchange and what we can do to expand the exchange and expand the number of ASEAN students in US higher education, and in doing so, also obviously expand platforms, including the Fulbright University, but also American universities have some of the world-leading digital and online education platforms. All of these have enormous room for growth in Southeast Asia, and it's something that we are very keenly focused on.
Well, thanks. I know that you're going to have to go soon, so let me give the last question to Alistair Scarf, who's with Bank of America in the region. Alistair asked whether or not you could speak a little bit more to areas in which the U.S. and Japan are cooperating in the region. He specifically mentioned security and defense, but if you want to take it broader than that, and also South Korea. How much are we thinking about cooperating with our ROC allies in Southeast Asia?
Great questions. So first, let me talk about Japan. Obviously, tremendously important partner and ally. It contributes enormously in almost every single conceivable dimension of engagement across the Indo-Pacific. Very, very constructive in its leadership in helping develop the prosperity of the broader region. Of the American alliance work throughout the Indo-Pacific. We have, I think, a relationship with Japan that just keeps getting better and better in so many different ways. And if you look at the Quad, most recently that took place in Tokyo a few weeks ago, the commonality of sort of shared strategic perspective is very strong. The sense of trust and confidence is, of course, equally strong. So Japan's an alliance partner that is truly important, and as I said, a cornerstone of all of our efforts. I think imitation being the most sincere form of flattery. When we received from Congress the funds and the mandate to engage in the Build Act's efforts, we're trying to be a little bit more like our Japanese friends in terms of developing the Development Finance Corporation and all of these other efforts. Because these Japanese efforts through JICA and JBIC and others have been helpful in building the world of prosperity that we see today throughout Southeast Asia, and very much have complemented the extremely heavy American investment in regional security and in ensuring free and open waterways and much else besides. With regard to Korea, they have a very vigorous strategy toward engaging with Southeast Asia and with the broader Indo-Pacific. They're obviously a critical ally and friend of the United States. Foreign Minister Kang had a great visit to see the Secretary yesterday here in the department. It's a reminder of Dave who's into the department all the time. I'm seeing meeting disconnected. Are we still on, Greg?
We can still hear your audio, not your video.
Okay. Huh, that's weird. I wonder what happened. Well, I'm just going to keep talking, lest I screw this up and cut the connection.
Okay.
But through KOICA and these other Korean overseas development activities, I think Korea can play a really great role in helping plug the remaining infrastructure gaps and development gaps all across the Indo-Pacific, not just in Southeast Asia, in the whole area of the Indian subcontinent, and even on the east coast of Africa. So we will continue to work very closely and collaboratively with our allies, Korea and Japan, and build upon their very substantial good work that has already taken place.
Great. Well, thank you very much for, again, a wonderful keynote, a survey of the region and U.S. involvement therein. We look forward to seeing what comes out of the summitry this week and into the weekend. And with that, let me let Atul and David go. Please join me in a virtual round of applause from your homes for their time. And we will introduce our panels. Atul, David, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
So with that, let's move into our expert panel discussion. Now, one of our panelists is having technical difficulties, I'm afraid. So for now, we're going to kick it off with two, and I'll introduce them now and then move into their brief remarks. And then again, anybody who would like to ask questions in the Q&A, please do type it in either while our panelists are presenting or afterwards when we move into Q&A. There's still several left in the queue from the keynote. And so if you'd like to leave your questions there, I'm happy to throw them to our panelists and they can take a shot answering them as well. So first, we're going to hear from Ambassador Nina Hachigian, who is currently the city of Los Angeles's first ever deputy mayor for international affairs. From 2014 to 2017, Nina served as the second ever U.S. ambassador to ASEAN. And her prior positions before that included heading up the Asia team for the Obama campaign. She was at the Center for American Progress at RAND on the NSC. And so Nina knows the region as well as anybody. And then we will hear from Ambassador Dino Patijalal. Dino is currently the founder of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Before that, I think many of our audience know that he was the Indonesian ambassador to the United States from 2010 to 2013. He was Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, and he was a close advisor to former President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. And with that, we will start off with just a conversation of the two ambassadors, pending our third panelist joining us. Nina, could I ask you to kick off our discussion?
Sure. Thanks, Greg, and thanks for having me. Thanks to CSIS, as always, for its excellent work. There are not too many think tanks that can say that their work actually affects conversations in the regions, but in the region rather, but yours really does. And apologies, I only caught the tail end of the previous presentation because it is early in California, so I couldn't quite get up at 5:15. You know, in my time as ASEAN ambassador under President Obama, we took ASEAN and its architecture very seriously. We saw ASEAN as a powerful framework for geopolitical stability. When you have it, when you have 10 smaller countries at the center versus any one of the big players in the region, we thought that was, a stable construct. Obviously, ASEAN has terrific markets for U.S. products, shares our belief in the rule of law. And so we engaged, we showed up with proper levels of seniority, and we really leaned into these fora. And because we put a lot in, we got a lot out. We were, I think, also somewhat creative in adding, suggesting arrangements that were going to be useful to us, like the informal Leaders Summit at Sunnylands in 2016, which was, I think, the first kind of special summit of ASEAN heads of state, or the informal defense ministers summits, which have become, been replicated all around by all the other dialogue partners, or almost all of them. But you can't get those kinds of opportunities unless you engage seriously and consistently in the regular summits and preparatory meetings as well. It was good to hear, the tail end of the previous presentation. There does seem to be some continuity, but the fact is that the Trump administration never filled my position, which really hampers us in terms of being taken seriously and being able to get what we want out of the relationship, because as you know, you got to show up, especially in ASEAN, if you want to be, have influence there. So I think that the next team will be, well, we'll be largely on cleanup duty, as seems to be the case for Democrats in my lifetime, not so much in Southeast Asia, but in many other areas. And we have obviously massive challenges at home that need addressing. So I think, I don't expect, although I could be wrong, you won't see, a pivot to Asia so much as just a pivot to the rest of the world again. And we're going to have to, engage as seriously as we ever did, but probably get less in return, because it seems in many regions, and maybe less so in Southeast Asia, but including in Southeast Asia, just, treading water at best. So my advice to the new team would be to get an ambassador out there as quickly as possible, somebody who ideally has had experience in the region, or is close to President-elect Biden, and to develop an economic agenda with ASEAN. We had the TPP while we were there, and that was very energizing for our relationship, and showed our vision for the economic future of the region of the Asia Pacific. I think we need something like that again. It doesn't have to be a trade agreement necessarily, but it has to be some major, economic engagement. Because after all, that is, ASEAN wants to consolidate itself further economically, and we want to be helping that project. It only is good for us. I would also suggest that we try to use climate and environment as one potential entree into that economic conversation, because these ASEAN countries are the ones that are going to get hit the hardest as the world warms, and because pollution is such a problem, air pollution is such a problem in Southeast Asia. I think that it's not easy work to do with ASEAN as an institution, but I think it's something that we're going to have to do everywhere, and it makes a lot of sense to do it in ASEAN. And I know that the different countries are at different levels of interest and engagement with that material, clean energy, et cetera, as it is now. But there's lots of jobs in clean technologies, and so I would suggest approaching it as an economic program as much as it is one that will save a lot of people's lives if we address it seriously. As to the EAS, we thought of it as a great place to discuss security issues, and that would include climate change, it would include COVID. We thought that there were other fora where you could have the economic conversation, but for EAS, we tended to use it as a place to talk about the difficult issues like South China Sea and others, North Korea's nuclear programs, where we didn't necessarily see eye to eye with the other dialogue partners. And we supported the idea of using the ambassadors, the EAS ambassadors in Jakarta, because they're all there, as a way to support the EAS. Nobody at the time anyway wanted it to be heavy with institutionally heavy, because it's really a leaders forum, and you want the flexibility for the leaders to discuss whatever it is they want to discuss. But it was helpful to have the EAS ambassadors begin the negotiations of statements and so forth. Glad to hear that YC is still in effect. It's a fantastic program. And we also, under my watch, started the US ASEAN Women's Leadership Academy. I hope that still exists. It did as of at least a couple of years ago. Well, look forward to what this next team will do. I think they're going to bring a lot of great energy. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Nina. Let's turn next to Ambassador Jalal. Patino, your thoughts?
Thank you, Greg. And hello, Nina. We missed you a lot in Jakarta. You were very active, and at least I get to see you in Los Angeles. And
Good to see you.
thank you. And by the way, you mentioned my what do you call it? My profile, but I also want to announce that I'm a proud COVID-19 survivor, right?
Goodness.
Yeah, many of my family had it, including my mom and dad, who's old, but miraculously they survived. Also, a quick shout out to my friend Alex Feldman. I know he's watching, and I'm sorry to get you off your next Netflix session, but I'm sure this is going to be more enjoyable. All right. Look, I want to begin with this point. First, congratulations on the elections, right? And the victory for President-elect Biden. You know, I think I'm going to miss the entertainment that we've had for the last 4 years. You know, with all the drama, intrigue, and it's just. It's just really amazing, but I think it's probably better for America that way. We heard Ambassador Atul Keshap spoke about all the dimension of U.S. engagement in Asia, including in Southeast Asia, and very rich engagement. I'm glad that in the last 4 years the bureaucratic and diplomatic machinery kept moving significantly. But I do want to point out that the average people on the street and a good portion of the officials, they see America not just from what we do, the bureaucrats and diplomats, but a lot from the leader of America, right? So America in the 60s was seen because President Kennedy shined, right? Or President Reagan defined what America looked like to the world. President Obama also projected America very well, right? But I gotta admit, I'm not a government official anymore, right? So I can be frank. The image of President Trump in the last 4 years have been, a bit confusing, right? So that has somewhat altered the way the public saw America, right? So at that level, that needs to be understood. There's I spoke to my European friends, and they said the one thing that America somewhat changed in the last 4 years was more element of unpredictability to it, right? And this is what we felt in Southeast Asia as well. So we welcome the Biden presidency that will rise by next year, and we hope that America will be as active as it was before and as present as it was before. Right? But I got to tell you that you will always have a seat at the table because America is a Pacific power, but it's not going to be automatic. You will have to re-earn that place. It has happened in the past. Yeah, there has been moments in the past whereby the region was moving in a certain direction, but America was not ready, or for some reasons it just did not, were not in the same rhythm as the region, and the region just moved on. And then United States, because it was distracted, but then got back on. Then it had time. It needed time to catch on, to catch up, right? And we saw this with President Obama, how actively he was trying to reclaim America's space in the region with a very active rebalance policy, with its rich policy contents, right? Joining the East Asia Summit, signing on to the Treaty of Amity Cooperation, the Myanmar policy, the economic cooperation with ASEAN, the strategic partnerships, and so on and so on, right? So it took some time. I just want to say that, look, it's not automatic, right? You really need a lot of work to re-earn that place at the table. What is different about ASEAN Summit this year is the feel, right? Among ASEAN, because of the COVID-19, the tempo has slowed down, because it's just to be expected. This happens elsewhere. But what is a bit different is that the sense of economic insecurity and insecurity over public health issues overshadow strategic concerns, right? And again, this is inevitable because everything in their mind is all about COVID-19 and the economic recession, right? So that's going to affect the ASEAN summit this year and also the East Asia summit. The only difference is that the feel now is different than the feel in mid-year, right? The feel in mid-year was hopelessness because things were not picking up and things were getting worse. But now there's a perception that vaccines are coming, right? And promises of delivery by at the end of this year or early next year. There is a hopefulness that some there will be economic take up a little bit, right? So there is a bit of optimism with regard to the ASEAN summit that we'll see in the coming days. I think the good news is RCEP will be signed after all these years of negotiations. I think they're gonna decide on what kind of language would be good to reflect that India would still be welcome at some point whenever they're ready, right? I think they're figuring out the language. On Indo-Pacific, look, I've been noticing that the U.S. policy on Indo-Pacific has been again more aggressive. Sorry, let me put it this way. In my discussions with American friends on Indo-Pacific, they've always said that this is not about China, right? This is not a containment policy towards China. But I gotta admit that in recent conversations and then looking at the statements by Secretary Pompeo, for example, including the statement he made at the Quad meeting, foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo, the feel that it is about containing China became somewhat more obvious. And to us in ASEAN, I think this is unhealthy because ASEAN always believes in an inclusive Indo-Pacific, and we don't want the Indo-Pacific to be framed as containing any of the major powers, right? So I think one big question for President-elect Biden is how will he frame America's Indo-Pacific policy, right? Would it be the same as in the last years of the Trump administration, or would it be something different? So that's quite interesting for us to watch. And maybe I'll stop there and then we'll take more questions.
Well, thank you very much. I think those are great points to start us off. And since Ambassador Jalal invoked his name, let me start with a question from Alexander Feldman from the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. So Alex had several questions for Ambassador Keshap and David Feith that we didn't get to, but one that Dino just picked up on was a question about vaccine diplomacy in ASEAN. And this has been a growing worry in the region, a growing worry for me, right? If the U.S. isn't seen as an effective partner in the development and distribution of vaccines, that's going to undercut all the good work that you do on anything else, because in 2021 and 2022, that's going to be the major issue for whether or not you are a responsible partner for ASEAN. So maybe I could start with you, Dino. What are your thoughts on how the U.S. is doing, what ASEAN wants, not just from the U.S., I suppose, but from China and the Australians and the COVAX alliance and all of these various options that seem to be out there? Well,
first, China has been quite proactive, right? So when there was no news about vaccines whatsoever, it's the Chinese that made an announcement that they would provide 50 million vaccine from Sinovac in cooperation with BioPharm. And what is unique is that the foreign minister of Indonesia traveled physically to Beijing, to sign this document and so on, right? And the model is B2B, state-owned companies to state-owned company, right? But I must say, I think from the Indonesian side, we always want to balance things, right? We like things Chinese, but we also like things American, right? So there's been efforts to look for other sources of vaccine. We found one in AstraZeneca, right? But so far, I haven't seen a strong U.S. vaccines deal with Indonesia. I think the feeling is that if Moderna comes out with its, I don't know, 100 or 200 million vaccines, most of it are going to be for the American consumers, right? Maybe a little bit, a couple million, tens of million for the outside world, but it's not just going to be enough for everybody. So I do think, look, don't underestimate the degree to which Southeast Asians will see that this is quite an important moment for the United States to, to demonstrate, hey, we're with you. We're with you and you can count on us, right? That's the message the Chinese are trying to project to Southeast Asia, and with some success, and I think the US should be in that game in a very proactive and aggressive way as well.
Nina, did you have any thoughts on the question of vaccine diplomacy and maybe where we go from here with an incoming administration?
Yeah, it's funny. Before you asked the question, that's exactly what I had written down. Is that that we ought to, if at all possible, we should work, and even better would be together with some of our like-minded friends in the regions, allies, partners in the regions, for a big public health push that includes vaccines, but also includes upgrading of hospitals, et cetera, which is, badly needed almost everywhere in Southeast Asia. So I do think, I think Dino's right. I think this is a moment. And if we're able to do that, I think that's, exactly the right way to put our effort. You're going to make a huge difference. Because after all, ASEAN's all about meetings. If you can't actually get together, it really puts a damper on the whole project. So if we're able to, provide the, the ability for them to start to meet again, I think that'd be huge.
Yeah, just an additional point to that, price will be very important because, the prices for AstraZeneca and the Sinovac vaccines, they're about $5 or $10, right? And so on and so on. So if American vaccines want to compete, they gotta have a good price point as well, right? But I assure you, any vaccine that comes from America, Indonesians will take it as at face value that it is good quality, because it's FDA approved, and your high standards, high technology, right? So your competitive advantage is in the reputation that American vaccines will be, always in good quality.
Well, I'll just flag for the audience that obviously development is just part of the problem here. Distribution is going to be a huge problem, and as you say, price is going to be a major decider here. The only realistic chance, it seems, to have an equitable distribution of vaccines is going to be under some kind of multilateral framework with the WHO, probably in the Gavi Alliance leading this COVAX facility, but that's only going to provide notionally guarantees of 20%, I think, of any given country's population. So even with that, there's going to be a huge gap, and it's going to persist for the foreseeable future. This isn't going to be something that gets solved in 2021 or probably even 2022. So this has to become a not permanent, but a long-term part of U.S. engagement with the region and for all the partners. So let's grab another question from the queue. We have one from Basil Constantinescu, who was the former deputy of the European Union mission to ASEAN. And he asks, with, let's see, all of the challenges we've laid out, do you think there's any chance for the U.S. to support EU accession to the EAS in the future? And I guess let me just broaden this for Dino in particular. Is there any chance that ASEAN endorses EU accession to EAS in the future?
Well, for me, I'm not privy to the internal discussions, but what I can say that it doesn't seem to be a priority for ASEAN at the moment, right? I may be wrong on this, but I believe that's just the mindset at the moment.
Hi, Basil. This is something that's been on the table, as we both know, for a long time, and I think we always were talking about like the size and like of the ability to actually have a conversation and all those things. I do think there could be more receptivity to it now, from the U.S.'s point of view, and obviously it's not our choice. But we are in a position where we're thinking a lot about our European allies and how much we really need to recultivate those relationships and how important they are to us. So I can imagine there being more sympathy to that idea than there has been in the past. But I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking only on my own, personal observation. So have no inside knowledge there.
Yeah, and of course, we also have now the question of how the UK engages with ASEAN now that presumably it is no longer part of the European mission to ASEAN, which has come up in a couple of events I've taken part in this year. Let's see, we have Michael Anderson who asked a question for Dino. Given your work with young professionals in Indonesia, Michael wonders what you make of how today's Indonesian youth view the world, how invested in they are the idea of ASEAN and the ASEAN project, or more broadly on global issues. Are they optimistic? Are they inward looking, etc.?
The Indonesian youth today is different than any previous generation. They're very open-minded. They are exposed to many different things. My daughter shocked me the other day when they said, "Dad, the difference between me and you is you were raised by your parents and I was raised by the internet, right?" And they do every time we talk or whatever, they always Google stuff, right? And they get their opinions and information from there. But that automatically makes them more globalized, right? Feel like a global citizens. They are nationalistic, but in a different way. They are less xenophobic than some people in my generation are. And they want to study abroad, my kids, right? And I hope the US will still be one of the key destinations for Indonesian students. I forget what the other points that were mentioned, but I hope that answers the questions.
Do you, and I suppose this is broader than Indonesia, but there's always a question of how much youth in particular are invested in the idea of ASEAN, right? The idea of a community that's bigger than the national community for each of these countries.
Yes, that's a good point. And you know what? The main weakness of ASEAN is that it is not grassrooted enough, right? If you ask me how many Indonesians know about the ASEAN economic community, I would say 1%, but even that's an ambitious number. Maybe 0.01% understand what the ASEAN economic community is, right? So people have heard of ASEAN, but in terms of ASEAN being household name that affects their livelihood, we're still a long ways from there. My organization, we did a research once on how much do the provinces and districts actually trade with ASEAN. And I was quite shocked to find that out of Indonesia's 36 provinces, probably no more than 8 or 10 actually trade across the border with ASEAN, right? Most have nothing to do with ASEAN, both in terms of trade and investment, right? ASEAN needs to do a better job really in bringing the idea and the relevance of ASEAN to the grassroots, because ASEAN was born as an elitist concept. It was born by diplomats and foreign ministers in suits and so on. And it took some time for it to digest below.
Nina, when you were at the U.S. mission in ASEAN, there was a big push from the U.S. to invest in kind of the building blocks of ASEAN community, right? This was part of what Waisili was all about. Do you have any reflections on how that project is going, and did you see strides when you were ambassador?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was created during the Obama administration, and I left. There were over 100,000 members of YC Lee, and I assume that there's a lot more now. I was just thinking that, anyway, we heard all the time from YC Lee participants that this was the first time they had really thought about their neighbors, that if they ever got any money together, they would always go to Europe to travel. And now they were actually thinking about going next door and how much they had in common, which they didn't realize. Like, we heard that stuff all the time, but there's only so much you can do with actually physically getting people together. And so I always thought we had a great opportunity to become an online community, which it sort of is, but not in a robust way, not in a way where the members can actually interact with each other online. And I think that now we would have to do that in a very different way technologically than was available back then. It should be a lot easier now to set up a bunch of Slack channels or whatever, TikTok channels or, et cetera, for them to interact. But I think that would be a huge service to ASEAN to help create that ASEAN identity from the ground up. I thought that at the time, YC Lee seemed to be the only program that was doing that at any kind of scale. But I think the answer is really to move it, online, or complement it online in a way that, at least in my time, we were never able to really do.
Thanks. Let's shift gears a little bit. We have a question from Pham Nhat Minh Chang from Vietnam National University. Minh wants to ask Dino in particular. You talked about how unhealthy you think pulling ASEAN into a competition between U.S. and China is. But trying to avoid that requires ASEAN being able to, bridge the shared interest between U.S. and China. And so where do you think the common ground is between U.S., China, and ASEAN that I guess ASEAN can help promote or exploit to avoid competition?
Well, we are realistically enough to understand that there will always be competition between the United States and China. Why? For the simple reason that U.S. is a superpower, and you have strategic primacy in the world, and the only power that threatens that strategic primacy is not India, although India is huge, right? It's not Russia, really. It's not Japan, obviously, right? But it's China, right? So there is, although probably Americans don't admit it, there's some kind of insecurity when you talk about China, because your number one place is being challenged, right? And in many places, China has taken that role, in trade and some other things. Yeah. When before Nina left, I remember one thing. I still remember it until now. You said that America does not want you to choose between China or United States, and I took note of that. Unfortunately, in recent times, that's what we feel, that America is pushing us more and more to choose. Probably not in so many words, but sometimes we feel guilty just for cooperating with China when we shouldn't feel that way, and so on, right? I'll be honest, we're not comfortable with this situation, but we do see there are always areas where the United States and China can cooperate, right? Definitely one area is on climate and environment, right? You can't be against that, right? You're all for that, including President Biden and President Xi Jinping. So there's a lot of scope to cooperate. Another area is terrorism, right? Of course, you can't be for it, but we're all against it, and there's always room to cooperate, right? And there are a whole bunch of other areas that, if you put your mind into it, there are, these things are psychological. I just wish Americans can do things without always looking over the shoulder and say, hey, where's China? Where's China? That's not the way a superpower carries itself. You got to carry yourself with confidence, do what you want, and let China do what they do, right? You have your own thing to do. And I should say that the America still has enormous capital in the hearts of Southeast Asians. My kids, they live in different countries. When I ask them, where do you want to study? The United States, right? Why? Well, the United States is cool. It's a hip place. It's open. Has the best schools, and so on and so on. So you will never lose that, at least for a little while.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I like the idea that if we're a superpower, we shouldn't be all that worried about what China's doing every step of the way. Although I think most Americans would say, well, but there are some things that we should certainly be concerned about. Let me go back to a few who have already gone into the queue once. So Alex Feldman has another question specifically for Nina, which I'm sure you've heard before, which is, why don't we talk about trade and economics in EAS? Why not make it a leaders level economic forum?
Hey, Alex. Obviously, leaders can talk about whatever they want to talk about. So, if there is, support for them to talk about economics, especially during, some kind of a crisis like, we're probably walking into, or we're in, I should say, economically in the world today, maybe that's then appropriate. It wasn't that, it was more, I think, our feeling that there was not a place to talk about the difficult security issues that existed already. And there were other fora to talk about economic issues, like, APEC and various other conferences, et cetera. So it was more that we wanted to make sure to talk about security issues because they were important to talk about, and there wasn't another fora. It wasn't necessarily the other way around, that we didn't want to talk about economic issues. It was China actually that always did want to talk about economic development, because they didn't want to talk about security issues, at least during my time. So I do think having a big American economic project is going to be important. And I do think it could be centered around climate. It could be centered around healthcare jobs. I mean, there's lots of ways to characterize it, but it's critical. And obviously having the private sector and the public sector speaking from the same sheet of music is always a good thing to do. Always, can be difficult to do, but we created this umbrella of US ASEAN Connect, which was to encompass all the various economic programs that we had and allow us to talk about it in a kind of coherent way. And that's still out there. So that's still, a framework for the taking for the new administration if they choose to engage with it.
A quick follow-up. So Michael Anderson had asked in the keynote previously about APEC, and I'm curious, from your time in the mission at ASEAN, how did you think about the intersection between the economic engagement we have with ASEAN versus APEC and this kind of tension, right? Because not all of ASEAN is in APEC, but APEC is a leaders level forum, and you're not going to get the US president to kind of mirror the economic discussion in both forums. So how do we think about balancing those two? Not to preview our second conference on Thursday too much, which is going to be about APEC.
It's a good question. We never really succeeded in trying to find a harmony. We had thoughts that may have worked in one or two instances, I don't even really remember, where all the various workshops in APEC could be open to the three ASEANs that were not in it. And therefore not have to duplicate efforts, but we never really got that kind of up and running in any kind of a vigorous way that I'm aware of. I think that this points to a question about how our Asia policy is organized within the State Department, because and within the interagency, because it's a bit fractured. So the folks who do APEC are not the same. They're all in EAP, but they don't they don't necessarily talk to each other and try to harmonize within the State Department. So then it makes it very difficult to do it out in the field. So I do think that how we organize ourselves within state and within the interagency, bears some real thinking for the new team, and to figure out how you get the most synergies, because we just have so much work to do at home that we're going to need to be efficient and coordinated and acting of a piece abroad. I also thought it also bears thinking about who ought to be the lead for economic issues in ASEAN within the interagency, because it's been USTR, but without TPP, that USTR may not really be the right fit for ASEAN. USTR is always frustrated that ASEAN didn't want to sign various non-binding agreements that were sort of to get ready for eventual possible TPP membership. And ASEAN was always irritated about why they had to sign something if it wasn't binding. And that kind of conversation is not really helpful to moving the project together when there's so much economic business that we do and so many important ties. So one thing to think about is how you pick the lead for economic issues in ASEAN among the interagency partners.
How do you think that most leaders in ASEAN think about this balance between economics and security and the role of EAS?
There's always been this question about architecture in Asia Pacific, right? We refer to it as the spaghetti bowl. You have and Nina knows this discussion very well. You have the East Asia Summit, you have the ARF, and you have APEC. And leaders don't have much time in the world to attend all of them, right? And the question is, can we simplify them, right? And how do you simplify them? Right? Should there be one structure? For example, I think there was a thought that East Asia Summit, would be what do you call it? At the top in some kind of structure and so on, right? But again, there's no movement on that question. And I think even this year, we're not going to see much in terms of architecture building. But again, I want to reemphasize that this year is really all about, or mostly about economic security, right? Public health security, obviously, COVID-19, and economic security, just like the Biden administration, President Biden has announced. Yeah, it's all about COVID and maintaining economic well-being, providing jobs, and all that. And it doesn't mean that security is pushed on the side, but at the moment, the mainstream thinking is health security is national security, right? And I think the paradigm has somewhat shifted on that. Even for Indonesia, the president. For the government who in the past did not realize how pandemic can change everything, and now they come to full realization about it.
That's I had forgotten, I think, the discussions that we used to hear about formalizing kind of a feeder system into the EAS, right? Where the idea would be you'd have like AMM and ARF, the ADMM, the ASEAN economic ministers and finance ministers, and I think that was trying to put, frankly, a framework that is somewhat alien to the way ASEAN works onto the organization, and also probably misunderstood how overworked the folks in the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta already are without adding more bureaucracy. But that said, in this COVID-19 environment, we did have one question from Jose Ludonio that I think is interesting. Will we see more bureaucratization, establishment of some kind of new permanent structures within ASEAN on the health front in reaction to this? Because that's always been health has always been one of a whole bunch of things in that other bucket of the ASEAN socioeconomic or socio-cultural community. It's not really been given the same level of attention as the political and the economic communities have.
You mean, is there going to be an ASEAN CDC like organization? That's the question I'm reading?
Yes, yeah. Is there going to be, or I mean, really anything that emerges out of this current crisis that drives greater health collaboration across the region?
The answer is yes. The question is what form? I say yes because the money is pouring in from Japan, from the EU, from the United States, right? In quite great numbers, right? EU is pouring in 800 million euros, and so on, right? So heaps of money, right? But I spoke with an ASEAN friend just recently, and the question is, okay, how do you, what do you call it? How do you organize that into some kind of a practical cooperative mechanism on the health sector, right? So that's the big question. The money is there, but the form is yet to be created. But obviously the need is there, But one thing that I find interesting, Greg, is that COVID-19 has proved that in times of this kind of crisis, ASEAN was working closer with dialogue partners than among each other, right? So it's probably a good lesson for ASEAN. Hey, how do we, how do we step up the game for the next crisis, right? Because obviously ASEAN needs to work a lot closer than it's working with other extra regional actors on, but this does not seem to be the case at this time.
Thanks. We're running short on time, and I want to make sure that we have a firm end here at 10 a.m. We have an interesting question from Mark Mannion. Nina, one of the things that we heard from Atul Keshap at the top of the keynote was a list of all of the new sister city relationships that we've seen set up, including some I hadn't heard of, like Las Vegas and Phuket, which is interesting and makes a certain amount of sense. But you've been now a deputy mayor and an ambassador. What is the value of all of these sister city relationships that get included in the fact sheets from state every year ahead of the summits?
Good question. I think that they basically serve to increase the people-to-people ties, and they are therefore, ballast. They are therefore, conduits to, in some cases, really valuable conversations, experiences, cultural, greater awareness. So they are what touch the American people. These things like sister city relationships and touch ordinary American people, and I think for that reason they are valuable for most cities. For a city like LA, which is the second biggest city in the United States and hugely diverse and very globally focused, we have lots of them. I think 27 or something. We're our mayor likes to say we're very easy when it comes to sister city relationships, but we also have other kinds of programs when we have a particular need that go beyond sister city, which tends to be, like I said, people exchange and cultural exchange, and it's and young people student exchange, which I think is really valuable. But for example, like we have a kind of an institution, citizens organization that we built up with Mexico, with the federal government of Mexico. So I'd say for an average, smaller American city, these are kind of the foreign policy of most American cities, other than some trade, stuff. And I think that they're, as long as there are citizens on both sides who want to keep them going, that in and of itself proves their value. and over time they really develop, can develop great relationships. So I support them.
Thanks. Let me end with one question that I'd like to get each of your thoughts on. So during the Q&A for Atul Keshap and David Feith, the first question was about who's going to represent the U.S. And it sounds like Washington's not sure yet, which I guess they can make the decision a little later than normal because this is going to be virtual. But it strikes at this importance of showing up that we always hear about in ASEAN. This administration doesn't have a great track record at the leader level. We're not the only ones. China has never sent its president to EAS, neither of the Russians. How damaging is it when the US doesn't send proper representation to EAS, much less the other ASEAN meetings?
I mean, I think of it as a missed opportunity. So the fact that we did send our president for, whatever, 5 out of the 6 or 7 out of the 8 or whatever summits was, demonstrated our deep interest, and whereas China and Russia, never did, even though they were a lot closer and could have. So I felt like it was a bonus that we could offer, and President Obama obviously he was just amazing. He had a lot of star power and charisma in and of himself, and he would take pictures with the perm reps, which was a huge deal, and a huge deal if it didn't, if it looked like it might not happen, and just represented the United States in such an eloquent and had the right tone about the fact that we were serious, also caring, and he obviously had his own, deep roots in Southeast Asia. So he was a perfect messenger. So I think when we don't send somebody, it's not, we shouldn't be judged differently than China and Russia, which never did, but it's just a missed opportunity. And especially if you also haven't shown up in other ways, like not having an ambassador, for example, or not going to the other, ministers' meetings, then you really are at a disadvantage, and you're just not making the most of the relationship that you could.
For I've been in the news a lot in the last 3 days because of the U.S. election, right? And I think one question that I get frequently asked, and I think I don't really quite know how to answer this, but hey, where does Southeast Asia fit in U.S. foreign policy? Under President Obama, it was very clear, with the rebalance policy and so on. But it wasn't as clear in the last 4 years, and they're asking under the Biden presidency, where is Asia's place? Right. For Indonesia-U.S. relations, I can say our president has not visited the United States in the last 4 years, and President Trump has not visited Indonesia in the last 4 years. Right. I think it's the same thing with the Philippines. Right. But Nina is right. Again, if the United States wants to show that Southeast Asia is important, Indo-Pacific is important, definitely showing up at that level, at that high level, is quite important. Not just symbolism, but substance, right? And again, I think those are the 3 S. That one is showing up, right? 2 is being steady, right? And the United States had not been seen as steady in the last 4 years, right? And 3rd is substance, right? You don't just show up, right? But there's got to be substance to your presence, right? So I think we do those 3 things: showing up, and being steady, and then showing substance. I think the U.S. will have a stronger presence in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to leave it. Thank you both, Nina and Dino, for joining us. Let me do a quick plug again that this is the first of a 2-part series. So on Thursday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. DC time, the Scholl Chair in International Business at CSIS will host our APEC look ahead, which will feature again a keynote and a panel. And APEC will be on the 20th of November. ASEAN, I think that's going to start tonight in DC and run through the weekend. The US presumably will start showing up in a couple days for the AS ministerials and the like. So with that, I invite everybody at home to clap. We can't hear, but we'll feel the love. And thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe.